Return to the planet of the apes.
Hello and welcome to Ape Nation, your number one source for all things Planet of the Apes on YouTube. My name is Josh, and today I am giving my review of the entire first and only season of the short-lived 1975 animated series, Return to the Planet of the Apes. If you like what I do here and want to show your support, be sure to hit the like button on this video. You can also join the Ape Nation Discord server for daily discussions about the franchise, and if you're interested in hearing my thoughts on all things film and entertainment outside of Planet of the Apes, you can check out my other channel, The Real Deal. If you're interested in seeing more of my videos here, be sure to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. Before we get started, as always with my reviews for movies and television, let's first take a little bit of a deep dive into the show's behind-the-scenes history. In 1975, after the failure and cancellation of the short-lived live-action Planet of the Apes series, NBC and 20th Century Fox decided to give the franchise a slightly different approach when it came to television, and agreed to adapt the franchise into an animated series that would air on Saturday mornings. DePay Frelling Enterprises was then brought on to produce the half-hour Saturday morning cartoon, which was soon titled Return to the Planet of the Apes. Johnny Quest co-creator Doug Wildey was then brought on board as the show's associate producer, storyboard director, and supervising director, and assumed the majority of creative control over the series. While fans loved the entire original 5-film run, Wildey had only ever seen the first film and its sequel, Beneath the Planet of the Apes. It's unknown why he never watched the remaining 3 films, but it was because of this that the show's world and story was primarily based off of those 2 films only. The series premiered on NBC on September 6, 1975, but unfortunately was unable to gain interest from fans, and much like the live-action show before it, did not have very strong ratings. The series aired on Saturday mornings at 8 a.m. West Coast time, and the opening credits voiceover was done by Ted Knight, with music for the series provided by composer Dean Elliott. Not long after the show's launch, the series was soon canceled, with the final episode airing on November 29, 1975. The final episode brought several storylines and concepts back together from previous episodes, but the story remained incomplete and was left on a cliffhanger, with the 3 main characters never making it back home. The network considered producing a second season that would have consisted of 3 episodes as a way to finish the show and give the characters and story some closure, but nothing came of it and the show was left unfinished. Apart from a short-lived period of reruns in the early 1990s on the Sci-Fi Channel, the show remained completely unavailable for fans to watch. It wasn't until October 3rd, 2006, when it was released on DVD, that the show was finally accessible again to fans. The show is now currently free to watch on YouTube, which you can find a link to in the description of this video. As for my personal experience with Return to the Planet of the Apes, unlike the live-action Planet of the Apes series, which I had seen several episodes of many years earlier, I had no prior exposure to this show until this most recent watch. Over the years, I'd heard surprisingly pretty good things about the show from several fans, most of whom being people who grew up with the show and were kids during its initial run, but I just never had any interest in watching it due to just an overall lack of enthusiasm on my part for a 1970s animated series that only ran for 13 episodes.
Read all about it. Simian Senate in top secret emergency session. Possible invasion of Planet of Apes by intelligent humanoids.
That being said, a few months ago, I decided to give the first episode a watch and was surprisingly intrigued, and so it was that I decided to commit to doing a full review for the entire show. I did consider doing week-by-week episode reviews similar to what I did for the live-action series, but due to how exhausting and repetitive that became for me, I decided just to watch the show all over the course of a few days and do one big review instead, and so now that I've actually seen the show in its entirety, I'm here to now give you my review. While out on a mission in space, 3 astronauts in their spaceship get caught in a time vortex and crash land on what they soon discover to be their own planet, Earth, but now in the year 3979. Upon arrival, they discover that intelligent apes are now the highest form of life and must find a way to make their way back home and perhaps convince the apes of humans' prior dominance along the way. As always, kicking things off with the characters and acting, and in this case voice acting, is going to be the show's main lead, Bill, played by Tom Williams, as well as Richard Blackburn, who took over the role from Tom Williams later on in the season, during the later episodes of the season. And when it comes to the character of Bill, I'm gonna be completely honest here. I know some people really like this show and might even like this character, but this is just my opinion. I think that Bill is about as basic and generic of a lead character as you can possibly get, and overall he's very paper thin and instantly forgettable as a character. He doesn't stand out as a human lead like Taylor or Verdon and Burke from the live action series did, and to me he's more on par with someone like Leo from the 2001 film. For the most part, he gets little development as a character, and aside from having a nice enough dynamic with Zira and Cornelius, just isn't someone that I ever found myself caring about as the show went on. Up next we have the character of Jeff, played by Austin Stoker, and if that name sounds familiar to you, that is because Austin Stoker played the brother of Mr. MacDonald in Battle for the Planet of the Apes. And overall, Jeff is, I guess, a likable enough companion to Bill, but honestly, I find him to be more or less the same in terms of intrigue or development. It is cool to hear Austin Stoker as the voice because I did instantly recognize him, but he doesn't really do much to elevate the role. I like him a bit more than Bill just on that basis alone, and because he does have a few fun lines and moments here and there, and the show tries to create a fun and charismatic buddy duo between the two of them, but it just never connected with me. Then you have the character of Judy, played by Claudette Nevins, and similar to how I feel about a lot of the show, which I will get to later, I really liked the initial idea of Judy being taken in by the Underdwellers, characters that also I will talk about later, but after the introduction, nothing is really done with her as a character for the rest of the show, and overall she's about as generic and forgettable as Bill and Jeff, and unfortunately is given even less to do for a large part of the show's story. But then on the ape side of things, we have what some people consider the face of the original franchise, Cornelius, this time played not by Roddy McDowall, but Edwin Mills. And to me, he is easily one of the highlights of this series alongside Zira, who also returns and who I will also talk about in just a minute. Cornelius in this show feels like a very faithful reimagination of the character from the movies, but also a bit more reserved and more akin to the version of Cornelius from the original novel. He's an instantly likable character who puts science first, but overall wants to do good, and I really enjoyed him anytime he was on screen. But paired with Cornelius is of course Zira, played by Philippa Harris, and to me is the true highlight of the show, even more so than Cornelius. Also like Cornelius, she feels like a middle ground reinterpretation of the character that combines the original films and the original novel, and just like in the first two movies, she is my favorite ape and favorite character overall. She's really lovable and really kind-hearted, and is driven by a desire for scientific discovery, but is slightly more driven by her really big heart and a desire to help others. I also really think that Philippa Harris is the only voice actor of the entire series who really stands out to me as someone who I actually recognize as giving a decent vocal performance, not to mention just how well she fits as a successor to Kim Hunter and is able to channel her energy into a slightly different version of the character. And then on the more villainous side of things, you have General Urko, played by Henry Corden, who is more or less the same type of villain as the Urko from the live action series, though not exactly the same character canonically, but unfortunately this version of the character just never gets any true moment to shine the way he does, though it's only brief in the live action series. All in all, I feel that he's just a very generic bad guy whose only goal is to crush the humans and keep them in their place. And this is a mild spoiler for the series, but I will say it was also very cool to see a character like him actually held accountable for his actions and humbled as we see towards the end of the show, but considering that it never actually went anywhere, it doesn't really make a difference in his character to me.
It is the decision of the Council that General Urko be suspended from duty without pay for 3 months, and that he make a public apology to all peace-loving apes on national television. Power is something that must never, I repeat, never be misused.
Then rounding things out on the ape side of things is Dr. Zaius, played by Richard Blackburn, who is a much more heroic, level-headed, and rational version of Zaius than we saw in the films, and I actually really loved his dynamic with Zira and Cornelius, honestly more so than in the movies. He treats them more as equals instead of inferiors, which is something that I really enjoyed and was really surprised by. I still prefer the version we have in the films played by Maurice Evans just because of how well written and how iconic he is, but if we ever get to see a new interpretation of a Zeus-like figure in future movies, I would love to see him take some more inspiration from this version as opposed to the film version. As for any standout, supporting, or guest characters in the show, there aren't very many, but I do have two that I did want to mention. The first of which is Krator, who is the leader of the Underdwellers, who are essentially a different version of the mutants from beneath the Planet of the Apes. And I gotta be honest, I actually really like the Underdwellers, or at the very least, I like the idea of the Underdwellers, and I actually like the idea of them even more than that of the mutants. I just wish that there was more done with them. I really liked the way that they worship ancient relics of humanity's past as a part of their religion and culture. I just found that really cool and really fascinating and a really interesting way to world build, and I think that Krator makes for a pretty fun leader for them, at least from what we get to see of him. I also really like that him, along with the rest of the Underdwellers, are a lot less hostile towards the humans of this world, as well as the astronauts, as opposed to the mutants, who see themselves as superior beings to all and treat others as such. The one other guest character that I wanted to shout out is Brent, who I think is a much better version of the Brent character than what we got in Beneath the Planet of the Apes. I think this version of Brent is a lot more interesting and charismatic, and honestly, of all the human characters in the show, he is the only one who actually stuck with me in any way whatsoever.
When exactly was your flight launched, Colonel Brent?
Ron. Call me Ron. I was launched August 6th, 2109, from a site in the Mojave Desert.
I really loved the idea of a human character coming from a different point in Earth's timeline, as opposed to just being another astronaut from the 1970s. It gives him and the show a refreshing human perspective. That being said, like most of the show, not a whole lot is done with him beyond his introduction, but moving on to the overall story and storytelling that is seen throughout Return to the Planet of the Apes, unlike the live-action series, the show actually goes for a long-term overarching story, at least for the majority of its episodes, as opposed to the standalone Adventure of the Week approach with no real overarching story. That being said, unfortunately the story itself runs out of steam after the first handful of episodes, and by the time I was about 7 episodes in, I realized just how little I cared about what was going on. There are some really strong and compelling ideas, such as the humans' continuous desire to prove to the apes that they once ruled the Earth and can be just as powerful as the apes, but the storytelling overall is thin, and because I never connected with the main heroes, it made it all that much harder to really care. And while the show overall is surprisingly less reliant on formula than the live action series, it still gets a bit repetitive and tedious after a while, as the episodes go back and forth between the apes and humans as to who has the upper hand, and each episode ends with a cliffhanger that you know will be resolved in the next one, only for it to end with another one soon after. In a successful show, this would keep me hooked, but here it just made me feel exhausted and bored. There's also a large segment of the story told throughout the series that involves humans and apes rediscovering flight, with the humans using the plane to gain the upper hand on the apes, which I think is really exciting at first, but it gets old quickly and soon becomes another example of repetitive storytelling. And speaking of flying, there's also a weird recurring subplot that involves a flying dragon, which then ends with the dragon being taken down by a giant gorilla. Or something. I still don't really know. But on a more positive note, when it comes to the world building in Return to the Planet of the Apes, the overall world here is radically different from both the original films and the live action TV series in terms of what the ape world looks like, and much more so how evolved they are. The apes here have a much more technologically evolved world, more akin to the original novel. It definitely feels inspired by the first 2 films in terms of its aesthetic, but pairing that with the technical evolutions of the book gives the show a unique world for these apes to live in. The way that human relics of the past are utilized and rediscovered throughout is pretty fun, and it helps in building out this version of this ape era. And as a whole, it made me even more interested in seeing an ape-run world on the film side of things that's more advanced like this, similar to what the ending of the 2001 film was setting up, but with more of a visual influence of the original films. And then when it comes to the animation, I love the design of the apes in this show. Because it's animated, it allows them to look more like real apes, but still still have an evolved humanoid element to their design. It helps make the show stand out more and helps make things a little more believable. Some of the overall animation is a little stiff and a little bit slow and feels dated, but a lot of it still holds up to me, as well as any other classic show like Scooby-Doo or the Flintstones. I've seen some people criticize it as a badly animated show for even 1970 standards, but personally, I really enjoyed the simplicity of it. There's also some comic art inspired sequences and transitions that are used, albeit briefly, and more so just in the opening credits than anything else, but it's honestly really cool to me. I love the old school drawings and would love to see some kind of concept art or illustration book if there is any such thing that does or could ever exist. And then also on the technical side of things is the music, which I am of two minds on. On the one hand, I do think that the music in the show by Dean Elliott is good, but it gets a bit repetitive after a while. It feels very 1970s cartoon, but also very Planet of the Apes, a blend of sci-fi sound with primitive influence done with a very classic cartoon style. I really liked the overall sound of the show, but after a while, even the music finds a way to start feeling a bit formulaic, as mysterious scenes have their own sound, suspenseful scenes have their own sound, and so on and so forth, and so I found myself getting a bit tired of hearing the same tunes over and over again. But on the other side of the coin is the opening theme that plays during the credits, and this to me is my absolute favorite part of the show, which maybe speaks negatively to the show as a whole, but the opening credits music in this show is flat out awesome. It is genuinely catchy and so fitting for this show, and every time I started an episode, it got me hyped, even when I was getting bored by the end of the series. I love this theme, it's an awesome opening tune, and honestly, if there was some kind of 2 to 3 minute full version of it that existed, I could see myself listening to it just as often as I do any other pieces of music from the Planet of the Apes franchise. As for the themes that this show touches on, Return to the Planet of the Apes is much heavier on Cold War and Vietnam War allegories than any other Planet of the Apes property by far, with one political ape figure even being modeled to look like Cuban leader Fidel Castro. The show overall is less focused on many of the other common themes seen throughout the franchise, but the recurring theme of empathy for others over cruelty in the face of fanatical leadership is something that is seen consistently as Zira and Cornelius repeatedly go out of their way to keep the humans safe from Urko. The show is also heavily anti-war, as Zaius consistently attempts to keep violence and extremism at bay and General Urko in check. Overall, I don't think that Return to the Planet of the Apes is a bad show per se, but I wouldn't really call it a good one either. It has a lot of awesome concepts and ideas, and I do appreciate that there was a real attempt at telling a long-form story in a Saturday morning cartoon, but I just think that the creators were never able to really capitalize on the potential. If I had seen this when I was a little kid, I would probably have enjoyed it a lot more, but as an adult, it just wasn't able to hold my attention and is not something I think I'll ever rewatch. Maybe it's a show that I could put on in the background just to appreciate the animation, world building, and music, but beyond that, I don't think I'll ever watch it again. Maybe I would have enjoyed it more watching it once a week as viewers did when it was airing, but as it stands, it just didn't work for me. I enjoyed any moment that was purely focused on Zira and Cornelius as well as Zaius, and it has its fun moments and aspects that I definitely appreciate, but at the end of the day, to me, this show is a mixed bag at best. So guys, that was my review for Return to the Planet of the Apes. For those of you who loved this show growing up, I'm sorry that this wasn't one for me, but I am glad that you enjoy it, and I want to know from all of you who have seen it, whether in its initial run or later in life, how do you feel about it? Do you like the series and wish we could have gotten more, or are you more like me who appreciates some of it, but overall could never really get into it? I want to know all of your thoughts down in the comments below. Thank you so much for checking out today's video here on Ape Nation. If you liked this video, be sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell so that you can stay up to date on all things apes. I'll catch you in the next one, so until then, goodbye.